Hi everyone, meteorologist Brian Bennett. We have a lot going on out in the Atlantic Ocean. We have a tropical storm, we have two tropical depressions, and we have a tropical wave. Not too surprising that we have a lot going on in the Atlantic this time of year, as we are in the very peak of hurricane season. Now I'll be watching Tropical Storm Florence and Tropical Depression number 9 the closest, as they have the greatest likelihood of making landfall. Here's the very latest on Tropical Storm Florence. Right now, winds of 65 miles per hour. It's expected to become a hurricane once again this weekend. Early next week, likely regaining major hurricane status, and it's looking more and more likely that it could make landfall in the eastern United States. Here's a view of the tropical storm right now, and you see that we have a lot of convection on the northeastern side of the storm. That tells me that there's a southwest wind, a lot of wind shear just ripping this storm apart. That's why the storm went from being a powerful Category 3 hurricane down to a not so impressive looking tropical storm. That's because of all the wind shear. Well, it's starting to move out of that area of wind shear and into a much more favorable environment. So we're going to start to see the storm look a little more impressive and start to develop once again. Here's the very latest spaghetti model plots for Tropical Storm Florence, and the models have really come together on this one. A couple of days ago, the spaghetti models kind of look like Medusa, going all type of different directions, but for the most part now, the models are really honing in on the storm moving off to the west-northwest, and again, possibly making landfall on the eastern part of the United States. As far as the intensity goes, pretty much all the models agree that we're going to see this storm continuing to intensify as it moves into a more favorable environment. All right, there are a couple of things that control the intensity of a tropical system: water temperature, the Saharan air layer, water vapor, wind shear. Well, the storm is located in this general vicinity right now, and as it moves farther off to the west-northwest, it's going to move into the Caribbean, where you see these deeper red colors here and also the Gulf Stream. This is very warm water, which will be plenty to fuel a hurricane. Additionally, we're going to see less wind shear as well in this location. We're also going to see less of an impact from the dry Saharan air layer. So basically, all the factors are coming together for this storm to re-strengthen, possibly becoming a major hurricane, and again, possibly making its way on shore. And what will determine whether this makes landfall and where it makes landfall will be how strong this ridge to the north develops. Here's a look at the European computer model, and you can see the red represents high pressure, the blue represents low pressure, and low pressure in hurricanes cannot go right through the middle of an area of high pressure. If it wasn't for this blocking high, our little tropical storm out in the Atlantic would say, "Peace out, dude. I'm heading out to the north, and I'm not going to make landfall anywhere because I want to go north towards Greenland and somewhere up farther north to die." But instead, we have this blocking high that's going to move to the southeast and block the storm from moving to the north, and that's going to prevent it from going out to sea, most likely, and possibly making landfall. Let's take a look at the run here with the European, and again, keep your eye on this storm right here. This is Florence and what we're talking about right now, and you can see as the storm tracks off to the northwest, we have a pretty strong blocking high that stays in place and prevents that northerly movement. Now, if this changes, then we will see a lot more quickly of a turn to the northeast and possibly not even make a landfall. But if this blocking high does what the European suggests it's going to, then we could be looking at a landfalling hurricane on or around September 13th. Here's a look at the European computer model, and let's go into the future with this storm. And you can see, again, the European calling for this storm to make landfall in the Carolinas around September 13th. Now, don't write in concrete or in stone that this is going to make landfall in the Carolinas. This is just this particular model outlook's projection at this time, and it could end up being the case, but as of right now, this is just kind of a basic idea of where the storm could be heading. Could it make it a little bit farther south jog and make landfall in Florida? Well, that's a possibility, but not very likely at this point. Right now, it looks like it's going to target more towards the Carolinas and possibly even the mid-Atlantic. Hopefully, it will not do that, and it'll actually stay out to sea, but that's looking less and less like the case. Here's a look at the GFS model. Again, a pretty powerful long-range model. And you can see that it's forecasting the storm to make landfall in the Carolinas as well. Again, this is on September 13th also. I want to show you another projection. This is the IBM supercomputer model, and it does show something a little bit different. It shows a storm curving off to the northeast and that ridge to high not being quite as strong. So the storm actually never makes landfall in the eastern United States, which would be great news. But again, that's looking less and less likely the more we see the storm continue its southwest and west progression. So it's looking more likely that it's going to be a storm that makes landfall somewhere in the eastern United States. Here's a look at the H-Wharf model, which I would say my two most trusted models would be the European model and the H-Wharf model. And this is unfortunately as far out as I can go with the H-Wharf model, but it is showing that blocking high as well, and it's showing the storm making that west-northwest progression. So likely over the next day or two, once we get a couple more model runs of the H-Wharf, it's probably going to show the storm at least brushing the east coast of the United States. So the H-Wharf is kind of on board as well. Here's a look at the magnitude, and you can see right now not very symmetric, and the wind's not looking very strong. But as we go into the future, we get into a more favorable environment with less wind shear, warmer water temperatures. We're not going to have the dry Saharan air layer. We'll have plenty of water vapor. So the H-Wharf model has a storm developing with winds blowing upwards of around 130 miles per hour and a very symmetric looking storm. So not a storm to play around with, especially if it looks like it's going to continue its progression towards making landfall in the United States. All right, shifting gears a little bit, here is Tropical Depression number 9. This just became a tropical depression as of the 5 p.m. outlook from the National Hurricane Center, and it has a storm moving westward, becoming a tropical storm over the weekend and likely a hurricane as it approaches the Lesser Antilles. Here's a look at the big view, and you can see all the storms once again. We have Florence right here, not looking overly impressive, but again, as it moves off to the west-northwest, it will develop more energy and more strength over a more favorable environment. Just a cluster of storms right here east of the Carolinas. This likely will not amount to anything. This is Tropical Depression number 9, looking pretty decent, and Tropical Depression number 8, a fairly large storm rolling off the coast of Africa right now. So here is Tropical Depression number 9, and this could become either Helene or Isaac, depending on which storm gets its name first. I'm thinking it's probably going to be named Isaac as it moves off to the west. Pretty due west, actually, for that matter, according to spaghetti model plots. Most models do have it making a pretty due west progression over the next couple of days. Here's a closer view of the storm, and you can see that it looks pretty healthy for a tropical depression. It might actually become a tropical storm pretty quickly, and if it becomes a tropical storm before the other one coming off of Africa, then it will get the name Helene. So we'll see which name it gets. Who really cares what it's called? Either way, it's going to likely become a tropical storm, and looks like it's going to be heading westward. Hopefully it will turn to the north, but a little too early to tell with that. Right now, though, all the model guidance is suggesting that it's going to be a storm that moves to the west. Speaking of, let's look at the European computer model, and let me actually rewind this real quick here, and this time focus on this area of yellow right here. You see this right here? This is Tropical Depression number 9, forecasted by the European. Now keep your eyes on that. It's forecasting it to move off to the west as well. And here we are on September 13th. This is the same day that the European is suggesting that we could have Florence making landfall, possibly in the Carolinas or somewhere on the east coast of the United States, but also making a potential landfall in the Lesser Antilles. Right here is Puerto Rico. So, you know, we're getting up on the anniversary of Irma and Maria, and obviously this is not something we want to see anywhere near Puerto Rico, as the folks are still trying to recover from Maria last year. Fortunately, right now, this doesn't look like it's going to be anything similar to Maria, but nonetheless, a hurricane that we're going to want to watch over the coming days and even weeks. The European actually has a storm weakening as it gets into the southwestern Caribbean. which would be a little unusual because this is somewhat a favorable environment for hurricanes to sustain themselves, but that's what the European is forecasting right now. The possibility does exist that it could actually roll up into the Gulf of Mexico and impact one of the Gulf Coast states, of course, Florida, not being completely out of the woods with this storm either, but we're talking something that's 2 weeks away, so we have a long time to watch that storm, and maybe no reason to be too concerned about it. Here's a look at the projected intensity guidance, and most models are suggesting that tropical depression number 9, which again could be Isaac, is going to strengthen into a tropical storm, if not a hurricane. All right, here's a look at the European computer models projected wind forecast, and let me slide this over for you, and you'll see two things here. First of all, you'll see the wind forecast from Florence indicating those really strong winds indicated near the center of circulation, and this is actually the storm that could be Isaac or Helene, depending on which one gets its name first. Either way, a tropical storm or hurricane moving over the Lesser Antilles right around September 13th. Winds possibly upwards of around 90 to 100 miles per hour. Here's Puerto Rico, again a little too close to comfort to this storm. You can see again the European is forecasting the storm to weaken once it gets into the southwestern Caribbean, which would be fantastic news. Even more fantastic if the storm weakens before that and is never a threat to land, but just something we'll have to continue to watch. All right, another storm that we're watching is Tropical Depression number 8. It's that big tropical wave rolling off of Africa. It's forecasted to become a hurricane by about Monday afternoon, and then likely making a turn to the north. That turn to the north is not guaranteed, but it is what the latest models are suggesting at this point. The Hurricane Center has that, and the spaghetti model plots are suggesting a turn to the north as well, which would be great news. That would mean it would be a storm for the fishes and one that we would never have to worry about. I did want to mention this storm as well real quick. This is Hurricane Ophelia. And Ophelia looks pretty good on satellite right now, a very symmetric looking storm. And there's a possibility that Ophelia could be heading towards Hawaii. Of course, we know Hawaii already had a very close encounter with Lane a little bit earlier this year, and tons of rainfall. In fact, I believe that storm produced the second most rainfall of any tropical system in U.S. history. Of course, Harvey from last year being the storm that produced about 52 inches of rain. But nonetheless, looks like the storm could be heading for Hawaii, bringing more rain for an area that doesn't need more rain. All right, let's go ahead and button all this up for you. What are some bottom lines here? Bottom line, or something I've learned over the last 20 years, when you're forecasting a hurricane, you want to know the model biases and strengths. And one thing, obviously, that I've learned, especially since Hurricane Sandy, is that the European model is a rock star when it forecasts high latitude pressure systems. What I'm referring to is that blocking high pressure system coming out of Canada. It does a really good job with that, and that high pressure system is really going to control where Florence goes over the coming days. So the European model is really something that we can start to trust. All right, another really important item is to look for trends and model consistency. Well, with Florence, all the models have been shifting the track to the southwest, and this has been a trend that's been going on for a couple of days now. So we look at that trend, and it kind of helps me buy into the possibility that it is going to possibly make landfall in the eastern United States. Model consistency. Well, we're looking at the European, the GFS, the Japanese, the Canadian, and several other models are suggesting that this storm is going to make landfall, and that type of consistency is what you look for to have a more solid forecast, and that's what we are looking at with Florence. So if this continues, we're looking at odds only increasing that this storm could be making landfall. So the bottom line with Florence is it looks like it does want to become a strong hurricane once again, possibly a Category 3 hurricane, and the U.S. landfall is looking more and more likely. As I mentioned, we're seeing that southwesterly progression, and some of our more trusty models are suggesting that we could have landfall. Right now, today, they're honing in on the Carolinas. That could end up being the case, but honestly, everybody on the East Coast should be watching this storm. it looks like Florida is out of the woods, but nonetheless, I would watch this. It's not completely out of the question that Florida could take a landfall from this, but for the most part, it looks like the storm is kind of narrowing down to the Savannah to Cape May, New Jersey area, which I know is still a large area, but that's really the area that should be focusing on the storm the greatest. So some of your hurricane plans should be in place, and you should be making early preparations like buying non-perishable foods and that type of thing, especially if you live in areas that are looking like they're going to be under the gun, especially in the coastal Carolinas area. Worst case scenario, you have a couple of extra groceries and a little bit more to eat. All right, the bottom line with Invest 92L, which is likely going to be Isaac, but could end up being Helene, depending on which storm gets its name first. And it looks like it wants to go on more of a westerly track than Florence did. Strength will be a big question mark with this storm. The intensity forecasts were not that great with Florence, so we'll have to watch this one pretty closely as well. The Caribbean needs to keep a very close eye on this storm, and if it survives, even eventually the Gulf of Mexico. Hopefully the storm doesn't survive and just dissolves, but right now it looks like Isaac could be a storm that we'll have to watch very closely as well. All right, guys, that's the latest on what's happening in the tropics. Hope you have a great and safe weekend. I'm going to make another video about red tide. I know that's a big thing impacting especially a lot of us Floridians. So I'll be making another video on that, but this one's already 16 minutes long, so going to wrap it up. Hope you have a great and safe weekend. I'll have another update on the hurricanes as soon as we get more information.